All right, welcome and thank you for attending the August Safety Conference webinar presentation of 2012. My name is Katie Parrish, Associate Publisher of Maximum Capacity Media and your host for today's conference. My contact information is located at the bottom of this screen and it will be available again at the end of the presentation in case you have some follow-up comments, ideas, suggestions, or questions after today's event. Maximum Capacity Media would like to extend a special thank you to the sponsors for today's presentation, Hydromobile and the Scaffold and Access Industry Association. Hydromobile designs and manufactures mast climbing work platforms that integrate innovative structural, mechanical, ergonomic, and safety features to increase productivity, facilitate project completion, reduce worker fatigue, and considerably decrease the risk of injuries. The company offers quality products that contribute to increased worker safety, security, and longevity. We'd also like to thank the Scaffold and Access Industry Association, which promotes safety by developing educational material, conducting seminars and training courses, and providing safety aids. It also works with state, federal, and other agencies to develop more effective safety standards. Before we get started, I'd like to make note of several lifting equipment related events that will be occurring during the week of October 22nd in Central Florida. The associations include IPAF and SAIA, magazines like Lift and Access and RER, and Ritchie Brothers Auctioneers. We've all joined together to bring lifting equipment buyers and operators a week of events that include educational sessions on safe use and operation of equipment and new technologies like Tier 4 engines, as well as equipment presentations and demonstrations from a variety of manufacturers who will be exhibiting alongside component, support, and aftermarket product suppliers. The week starts off with IPAF's U.S. Convention, which takes place October 22nd and ends at noon on the 23rd. The SAIA will also hold its regional meeting on the afternoon of October 23rd. Both events will provide educational seminars for owners and users. On October 24th and 25th, the Lift and Access Showcase and Symposium will be held at the Ritchie Brothers Auction Grounds. Event partner is RER. And live equipment, presentations and demonstrations, exhibits, a Tier 4 panel discussion will take place. Booths will also be open during the live Ritchie Brothers equipment auction on October 25th, and attendees will be able to bid on equipment while they visit the exhibition area. Wrapping up the week is the Crane Operator Rodeo National Championship, which will also be held on the Ritchie Brothers Auction Grounds. If you'd like more details on these events, visit liftshowcase.com or visit the appropriate partners, their websites, or you can contact me and my details are listed below. Now back to the safety conference. When safety was first introduced in 2007, our mission was to bring lift equipment, users and operators, presentations and information to raise safety awareness in the construction, rental, and industrial markets. Topics are selected to help provide clarification to these industries. Awareness and clarification is brought to the audience in hopes of unifying industry efforts, which ultimately will help save lives of equipment operators and workers on the ground. Today's presentation is a familiar face to many of you in the aerial lift and mast climber industries. Kevin O'Shea is the Director of Safety and Training for Mast Climbers LLC in Atlanta, Georgia, and he's a representative of both the SAIA and IPAF. He is involved in industry design committee work, such as with the ANSI A92 Main Committee, A92.9 Design Committee for Mast Climbers, and A92.10 Design Committee for Transport Platforms. He's also been a recipient of a number of industry awards for safety and outstanding service. Today he will present mast climbers, boom lifts, scissor lifts. They're all different, except when it comes to liability. This seminar will look at best practice methods that may protect you from many of these liabilities. If you have questions for Kevin during the presentation, please type them into the questions box on your screen, and we'll be happy to review them after the presentation. With that said, Kevin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me just bring my screen up here. Okay, the subject for today, boom lifts, scissor lifts, mast climbers, different products, same liability. And before I start speaking, one thing I want to mention to everyone is I'm suffering with some sinus infections. It's probably difficult enough to listen to me in Scottish to try and understand me also with that. a sinus infection today, so I apologise, and I'll try and speak as clearly as I can. Liability comes in many forms, and we can describe it as something that is a hindrance or that puts an individual group at a disadvantage, or a group themselves at disadvantage. Something that someone is responsible for, or something that increases the chance of something occurring. But liability is very difficult to spot sometimes before an accident or an incident happens. Coincidentally, it's also glaringly obvious after an accident to some people, especially to plaintiffs' attorneys. So we want to look at the management of liability. And a big part of the management of liability is procedure. Procedures obviously help us to run our business, but they also help us to adhere to the regulations and to the rules that govern our business. And I think first we should probably try and identify what those are. For the business that we are in, i.e. boom scissors, mast climbing, work platforms, etc., the regulations ostensibly begin with OSHA 1926. The regulations are the law, and we must comply. There are also rules which affect what we do as an industry. Manufacturers' guidelines or rules, for instance. ANSI standards are also rules that we should attempt to follow. And then there is a plethora of guidance. IPAF, SAIA, ARA, AEM and AED all collaborated, for instance, a couple of years ago and produced two documents. One is on the Statement of Best Practices of General Training and Familiarization for Aerial Work Platform Equipment. And the second one is a Statement of Best Practices of Personal Fall Protection Systems for Aerial Work Platform Equipment. There's also other guidance in the forms of OSHA quick cards and tip sheets. There is a difference. An OSHA quick card is a restatement of regulations, and a tip sheet is industry outreach guidance and best practice information that's released by OSHA's Alliance team working with the industry. And all of this stuff is good guidance, regulations and rules that we should try and have influence what we do, our procedures in our business, in order to start to manage some of the liability that we have. Owners and users of this equipment walk a bit of a liability tightrope. It's sometimes difficult in this industry to absolutely identify what we're supposed to do, just because of some of the regulations that don't exist or that may need interpretation, which we'll come to. And what we need, what our industry has, is a safety net to protect us from some of that liability theoretically. And that safety net for any industry would normally be made up of rules, regulations and laws. Our industry safety net has some holes in it. What I began with on one of the previous slides, which is the Code of Federal Regulations, CFR 1926, Safety and Health Regulations for Construction. Essentially written before boom lifts, scissor lifts and mast climbers were widely used in this country. Within there is a paragraph which will point towards ANSI A 92.2, 1969, vehicle mounted elevating and rotating work platforms. And that is really the only OSHA official recognition of an ANSI standard, because the OSHA regulation will direct you to that particular ANSI standard. We have also, though, a subdivision or a subsection within the regulations called Non-Mandatory Subpart L Appendix C Consensus Standards. Within that paragraph, you will see ANSI 92.3 for manually propelled elevating aerial platforms, 1990 release, ANSI A92.5 boom-supported elevating work platforms, 1990 release, ANSI 92.6 self-propelled elevating work platforms, 1990 release, 92.7, which is for airline ground support vehicle-mounted vertical lift devices, 1990, 92.8, which is for vehicle-mounted bridge inspection and maintenance devices, 1993, and ANSI 92.9, which is for mast climbing work platforms, 1993. And the inference is that adherence to those standards is considered to provide employee protection equivalent to that provided by 92.2 1969 version. So essentially, a lot of that's not very helpful for us as an industry because it's asking us to conform to a scaffold standard which was written before almost all AWPs and MCWPs were even invented, which contains within it an outdated ANSI standard for outdated truck-mounted booms, equivalent conformance to which can be achieved by adherence to a set of product-specific ANSI standards, which are now also outdated. So there are a number of areas within the standards where owners of equipment, users, contractors, must find it very difficult to plot a path through some of this regulation to come out the other end and decide what they're supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do, which of course has a direct impact on liability. What we can use and what OSHA uses to very good effect is the 5A1 or the General Duty Clause as it's known, which begins with a very simple premise: each employer shall furnish to his or her employees employment and a place of employment which are free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm. Recognized hazards being two very important words within that sentence. And it also says a hazard is recognized if the employer's industry recognizes it. That means our starting point when we have boom scissors, mast climbers, either in use or we own them, is to begin with any applicable OSHA regulations. Is there anything within 1926, in particular probably subpart L scaffolds is a good beginning point, that would seek to control any part of what we do? We then want to look at manufacturers' manuals, which obviously include essential information for the safe use, maintenance, inspection, etc. of that equipment. We also want to look at ANSI standards. We also want to go to the OSHA tip sheets that I previously mentioned. And we also want to look at industry best practice. The example I've given here is the IPAF and SAIA endorsed IPAF guidelines for the safe use of mast climbing work platforms. But all are examples of where employers will find information to assist in compliance with OSHA 5A1 or the General Duty Clause. So let's begin by asking ourselves any applicable OSHA regulations that apply to what we do. Subpart M, fall protection, is one of those areas. Examples of disregard for subpart M exist on every job site. Some of them are worse than others, but what we see all the way through these examples is that there is a lack of respect for the hazard itself and obviously a lack of training for best practice. So all of these different disregards for subpart M, fall protection, are obviously punishable by citation, etc. I'm sure some of them obviously relate into accidents, and that's when liability obviously becomes much more of an issue all round when it comes to civil suits and not just citations but also injuries etc., which we'll come to. Here's an example of a mast climber, which is a state-of-the-art mast climber, and unfortunately it's been ruined by somebody not paying attention to proper fall protection regulations with regard to guardrails and exposed areas and edges, and also hasn't paid any attention to OSHA's planking requirements, as we can see here also. There's another one where someone has decided to manufacture themselves an extra piece of platform using, actually that's the steps that get you up into the platform, and have decided to attach them to the corner of the machine with some tie wire in order to get out another couple of feet on one corner. Here's another one. And we're going to come to something which is quite important, which is the job survey. If we look at this particular picture, you'll see that the contractor has clearly rigged something up to get to the corner area of the facade on which he or she is working. The job survey and the planning process, one would have thought would have highlighted the requirement to get to that area, and therefore it should have been properly planned for. What's happened is that no one has taken cognizance of the necessity to get to the corner area. The machine has been built, the contractor has realised that he needs to get round the corner and has decided to find a number of pieces of material on the job site which he's fashioned together into a corner return, which is of course wholly insubstantial. And the last one, which kind of just breaks every rule that I could think of, but again, all part of flagrant disregard for OSHA regulations. Training also affects what we do. OSHA has training requirements, and training is required to prevent this kind of misuse of equipment. Clearly, these are things that shouldn't be done. Training should be highlighting the kind of behaviour that's expected of someone who's operating this kind of equipment. People who are performing these illegal acts, if you like, should also be aware through training of their precariousness, if you like. Another one here. Someone trying to protect himself, I guess, from the sunshine and possibly the rain. The sail effect of this kind of thing on a platform exerts a lot of extra load, which the machine may well not be designed to take. And OSHA also has something to say on stability, whether it be a boom lift that's working in an area where no one has assessed the ground's ability to take the load that's being imposed, or alternatively the other type of stability, which is that the machine has to be situated on some kind of stable mud sill arrangement if it's required. For instance, like on mast climbers, they will require mud sills under the outriggers. This is clearly not acceptable. And that takes us to the General Duty Clause itself. I said earlier that the General Duty Clause was something that OSHA can make use of in the absence of clear and concise regulations relating to our products. And this is an example of this. I blacked out the company's name for obvious reasons, but I point out first of all that under the General Duty Clause, and this is a violation, this is an actual violation that's been written under the auspices of the General Duty Clause, as opposed to subpart M or subpart L or any of the other parts of the OSHA standard or regulations which we can be written up for as an industry. The General Duty Clause is very useful here. It's a serious violation. And if we look at the description below, it says the employer did not furnish employment and a place of employment which were free from recognized hazards that were causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm to employees. At that point, that's almost the entire wording of the General Duty Clause. We follow on in the sentence and it describes why. in that employees were exposed to tip over, fall hazards and personal injury due to lack of familiarization training upon delivery on the use and operation of the aerial lift. Then it follows with the location, the type of equipment that was delivered by the rental company. And if we go to the bottom of the citation, as a method of abatement, there is direct reference made to the ANSI A92.6 2006 standard. So this is an example of where an OSHA compliance officer will invoke the 5A1 general duty clause and use industry information like an ANSI standard in support of that violation. I had a quick look on, and something you may want to do if you don't do it, OSHA have a category called the Fat Cat reports, fatalities and catastrophe reports. OSHA will report anything where there is an employee-employer relationship in terms of fatalities, catastrophes, serious accidents. They also have a database where you can look for citations. In the last 28 days, I found 6 citations for general duty clause violations on aerial work platforms and mast climbers. That was only for the general duty clause part. There were other citations there with regard to fall protection, with regard to training requirements, with regard to aspects of 1926 that do apply to our product. But this was just the general duty clause violations. So as an owner of equipment, as a user of equipment, we have to have important information with us. The phrase in the general duty clause is recognise hazards. We have to protect our employees and give them a place of employment which is free from those recognised hazards. How do we recognise that hazard? Well, it comes in the form of information. It comes in the form of manufacturer's manuals. So do you have them? Do your employees have access to them? And do they understand them? It comes in the form of the ANSI standards. Do you have a copy of the ANSI standard? Are you in compliance? It comes in the form of the OSHA tip sheets. Have you downloaded them from OSHA's website? Do you follow the general advice that they give you? And it comes in the form of industry best practice. Are you aware of all the industry best practice material that is available to you? Have you read it? And have you implemented any of the advice? So, going back to the wording of the general duty clause, each employer shall furnish to his or her employees employment and a place of employment which are free from those recognised hazards. How good is your safety net now? How much of this have you done? How much of it do you think that you should do to mend those holes in your safety net? A lot of people I talk to tell me that they place some faith in their insurance companies. Insurance companies are obviously vital to your business, but they don't know about your business. That's the point behind insurance companies. They think that you know about your business, which is the vital point. If you're unlucky enough to have an accident and you call your insurance company, you're going to get a deluge of emails and phone calls from insurance personnel, the insurance company attorneys and lawyers, and they're going to be asking you for documentation. They're going to be asking you for training records. They're going to be asking you for procedures. They're going to be asking you for service records. Read their statements and declarations exhaustively. They're going to put together a storyboard of what they think happened in order to defend you. You have to read it and make sure that they are factually correct. Insurance companies don't really know your business. They need you to know your business. So, our owners and our users of booms and scissors and mast climbers walk this liability tightrope. But most company owners hand most of their liability to their employees. Your operational staff are walking the tightrope on your behalf on a daily basis. If they fall, so could your business. So make sure they don't. This photograph is an example of a machine that is still in the air. What happened was it wasn't attached to the building properly according to instructions, and it partially came free. It was subsequently reattached and then brought to the ground and dismantled safely. But the point behind showing the photograph is that there was a procedure which was not carried out properly by the installation staff, presumably. If they didn't carry it out properly, the question really is, were they shown how to do it properly in the first place? Therefore, there may well be additional liability, lack of training, lack of education. So we have to make sure that when we ask somebody to do something, we know that they have the tools and the experience and the training to be able to carry it out. What's the cost of an accident? God forbid something should happen, and this is quite interesting to me. The National Safety Council produce figures at times during the year where they look at average direct costs. One that I read recently was about $38,000, average direct cost of an accident. And that was based on emergency room, doctor's visits, medical bills, medicines, rehabilitation, etc. Alarmingly, indirect costs were assessed at $150,000. Administrative time dealing with medical care, raises in medical insurance plan costs, replacing the lost hours of the injured employee by hiring another one, loss of reputation, loss of confidence from customers, unwanted media attention. The list is endless. $188,000 with a sales margin of 5%. I hope your salespeople are good, because that's another $3.8 million in sales they'd have to generate in the year to pay for the cost of the accident so far. And there are other considerations: damage to the equipment, OSHA fines, possibly resulting civil action, and a detrimental effect on the experience modification factor, which of course is part of a general contractor's selection criteria on most of the big jobs these days. And the end result really is you can't afford to have an accident. Quite simply, that's all that matters. You can't afford to have an accident. So let's go back to the tightrope walker. Tightrope walkers in the circus need comprehensive training, and they need a good safety net. So do your operational staff. So you have to train your key personnel, invest in them, and you have to build watertight procedures. The Department of Labour statistics have stated that there is an approximately a 400% return on every training dollar spent. And good training and solid procedures have something in common. They both have inherent strength in their consistency, in their accuracy, and their repetition. Contractors who succumb to the industry's tendency for instant gratification, and training companies who need business, can very quickly erode the consistency and the accuracy of the training. And these are the very values which will lend more protection against liability. It's a sad fact that contractors have asked trainers in the past to just sell me the training cards, somehow thinking that that gives them a good deal. So the training company walks away, and the contractor who really, really needs that training doesn't get any. If owners and users would sit back down and look at the wider picture, they would be beating down the doors of training companies and burning the midnight oil writing procedures to protect themselves. Let's look at one example, the job survey. I'm going to start with an OSHA definition of scaffold. OSHA's definition of scaffold means any temporary elevated platform, supported or suspended, and its supporting structure, including points of anchorage, used for supporting employees or materials or both. So that's all of us. And then I want to follow up with 1926.21b2, the general statement, which says the employer shall instruct each employee in the recognition and avoidance of unsafe conditions and the regulations applicable to his or her work environment to control or eliminate any hazards or other exposure to illness or injury. And then let's look at the scaffold training specific. The employer shall have each employee who performs work while on a scaffold trained by a person qualified in the subject matter to recognize the hazards associated with the type of scaffolding being used and to understand the procedures to control or minimize those hazards. In order to train our staff in the avoidance of recognized hazards, we first have to find the hazards. This means we should perform a job survey. So what's a job survey? A job survey is a risk assessment and requires to be completed by a qualified person. That person has to walk onto a job site, has to identify the hazards, has to evaluate the risks and who may be harmed and how they may be harmed, has to define, document and implement control measures for those hazards, and has to review the implementation as necessary to make sure that it's still working. Qualified definition means by possession of a recognized degree, certificate of professional standing, or who by extensive knowledge, training and experience has successfully demonstrated his or her ability to solve or resolve problems relating to the subject matter of the work or the project. That's the kind of person who should be performing a job survey. Once we produce a job survey, we have to analyze the severity of what we find. There are industry tables of information out there that one can use. This one is something that I use. What we have is 1, 2, 3, 4 on the left-hand side on our table is the likelihood of the hazard occurring. 1, is it highly unlikely? 2, is it possible? 3, is it probable? 4, is it certain of occurring? And then along the top, we have A, the severity if the hazard occurs, A, minor injury, cuts for instance, B, broken limbs, C, serious injuries, D, permanent incapacity. And then we have a key for our 3 colours in our table. If we analyse the risk and it falls in the green area, we've got to consider putting up maybe warning signs. If it's yellow, there's training and hazard physical control involved, for instance guarding, to bring it down into the green zone. And if we find anything that we analyse that's in the high part of the table, it's unacceptable. We have to prohibit it, we have to do something different, but we can't carry on with it in any circumstance. If we look at the likelihood being highly unlikely, or 1, and if it happened it would cause a minor injury, that would define that hazard as low. Therefore, going back to our key at the bottom of the page, we may then have to think about maybe a small warning sign or something of that nature just to deal with a small residual risk. However, if we go to the likelihood where it's certain and where it would cause permanent incapacity, that takes us to a high residual risk or a high risk, and it's unacceptable. So by analysing each of the unsafe situations, the hazards that we find on the job site in this way, we can decide whether we have to leave it the way it is if it's safe, put up a small sign, manage it by putting a guard around it or training specifically on the task, or doing something other than the task if it's very, very risky. We can also then define a risk assessment for that task. Here's one here for John Doe, assessed by Jane Doe. Activity or operation being assessed is the assembly of a mast climbing work platform mast. The hazard is working at height. At risk would be the installer of the equipment. What control measures can we introduce? The answer, all work to be conducted within the confines of the platform and its guardrails. Secondly, if working outside the guardrails, safety harnesses are to be worn. Thirdly, anchor points for harnesses to be the main members of the deck or the mast sections as defined by the manufacturer or any other anchor point. Once we put those control measures in place and we analyse the risk, it still comes out to a 1D on our table. Going back to our table, a 1D is a medium risk, so we still have to do something about that. The medium risk says training and hazard physical control, example guards, to bring it into the green zone. That's why we have to comprehensively now follow on and train our installers of mast climbing work platforms. Once they are trained, that medium risk will then be managed by training into the green or the low area of the table, and it will be acceptable to go ahead. Who is responsible for identifying risks and hazards? The employer is responsible. The ANSI standards state, before use, the work site shall be surveyed for hazards. So the question is, who surveyed the job? Who identified all the hazards? Who selected the most appropriate type of access equipment based on the job survey? And if someone did survey the job and identify potential hazards, was he or she qualified? Here's a rental company scenario that we have on an everyday occurrence. Contractor calls a rental company and over a 10-minute conversation is asked a series of questions. What height do you need? 50 feet. Is that working height or platform height? Platform height. Boom, scissor or mast climber? Boom. Articulated or telescopic? Don't care, just get me a 50-foot boom. Four-wheel drive or steer or oscillating axle? Does that cost extra? Yes. But is the ground good? Yeah, it's fine. Are you sure? Four-wheel drive might help. No thanks. Gas or electric? Gas. When do you need it? Tomorrow morning. Those questions come out in a 5 or 10-minute conversation on the telephone, amongst other kind of small talk and all the usual kind of talk that we have between a higher desk individual and a potential customer. The rental desk clerk is asking those questions in particular to determine what the customer wants. But the contractor can sometimes think he's in a discussion to identify what he needs. It's therefore possible for a contractor who hasn't surveyed the job to call and order aerial work platforms from a rental desk employee who hasn't surveyed the job either, and who, by asking some basic questions to identify the machines the customer wants, delivers wholly unsuitable equipment to the job site. And if anything goes wrong, the contractor has the liability. So contractors and owners can't easily transfer their responsibilities. The contractor may well have presumed that he was getting constructive advice from the rental desk clerk. He wasn't, because it's not the rental desk clerk's responsibility to do it. It's the contractor's responsibility to conduct a job survey, decide what the hazards are, and decide what type of equipment he or she needs to overcome those. So owners of users of booms and scissors and mast climbers should accept certain responsibilities and plan to manage them. When it comes to planning, a comprehensive job survey, completed by a qualified person, documented, and any risk prevention measures, for example harnesses, communicated to all those who are exposed to the hazards. Walk the workplace and look at what could reasonably be expected to cause harm. Ask employees or their supervisors what they think. They may have noticed things that are not immediately obvious to you. Visit the OSHA website. OSHA publishes practical guidance on where hazards occur and how to control them. Ask your industry associations for advice and ideas. Check manufacturers' instructions or data sheets on recognised hazards. Remember to think about long-term hazards to health, noise, exposure to harmful substances. Be aware of known potential hazards associated with the use of aerial work platforms or mast climbers. The ANSI standards, for instance, list operator warnings and instructions that must be included in your hazard identification. When it comes to training, operators and installers of the equipment should be trained and familiarized by a qualified person. Identify your key employees in the safety chain. Example, identify those who need to be qualified. Identify those who need to be competent. Identify your installers. Identify your operators. Ensure that each level has the appropriate amount of training and experience for the job that they have been asked to do. Ensure that your nominated competent persons also have been clearly indicated by you, by the company, as having the authority to stop the job and take corrective action if necessary. Identify job-specific hazards and methods of abatement, and ensure that this information is reviewed with site personnel and that it is available to any new personnel who may start work on the job after the initial training and familiarization. Document the experience and training of all of your key personnel. Encourage them to maintain a logbook of their experience and training. A logbook, if they can be encouraged to keep it, is a fantastic legal tool that proves their experience, that proves the longevity of their experience in working with a product. Inspection. The equipment requires to be inspected before use and periodically according to the requirements of the manufacturer and by ANSI by a qualified person. Manufacturer's inspection requirements must be adhered to. Make sure you know what they are. ANSI inspection intervals are a good backup if there is insufficient manufacturer info. For instance, some manufacturers have gone out of business. You may have equipment where you can't get manufacturer's advice. The ANSI standard is a good backup. If you give someone the job of carrying out a pre-use check of the equipment, make sure that they are qualified to do so. Make sure you've had them trained. Ensure that you have a system in place for dealing with damages identified during inspection. For example, lock and tag it out, report it to a competent person, document the repair as carried out by a qualified person, test the machine, then put it back into service if it tests okay. Systems should be in place to manage the ownership or use of the equipment in accordance with any relevant OSHA standards, manufacturers' guidelines, industry advice, and industry standards. This can be a challenge for most owners and contractors. In an ideal world of new equipment, an owner will have researched all the requirements for the management of the liability before the purchase and would have created a robust system of asset or equipment management before the equipment is received, and will have identified key personnel and will have them trained to be able to carry out their required duties. That's obviously not what happens. The reality is very different. But training courses are readily available from manufacturers and from industry bodies. Booms and scissors have operator training available, demonstrator training available, instructor training, service training, and probably very important, management training. Mast climbers have operator training, mobile operator training, demonstrator training, installer and advanced installer training, instructor training, service training, and again that all-important management training course. If there are 3 immediate steps to drastically improve your liability control that you can take, invest in training for your key management and operational people. Identify who they are, identify the responsibilities they have, and find training for them as soon as possible. Not only will that protect you by having people who are trained in key roles and positions in your organization, but it means that that training should filter down into other areas of your business. Find internal or industry expertise to help you to put a simple but a watertight set of procedures in place, which will keep you in compliance. Procedures don't have to be the size of War and Peace. They don't have to be 5,000 pages long. An effectively written, simple procedure is sometimes much more effective because people can understand it, and therefore they are happier to follow it. Hold weekly job site meetings where your operational personnel can discuss any safety issues and address them quickly and comprehensively. If you do those 3 steps, you will have drastically improved your ability to manage your liability. Thank you for listening. I'll hand you back over to Katie. Please, if there are any questions, please email them, anything that you need answered, and we'll do our best to reply to them as quickly as we can.
Thanks, Kevin. We'll give you a second to get situated here. We do have some questions from the audience, and we have some specific questions as well as some general questions about liability. If you've got a few minutes to answer, that would be great. Okay, good.
If my health holds out, yeah.
Yeah. That's no fun. All right. First of all, this presentation has been recorded and it will be available for you as a video on our YouTube channel. You can also view it on our website, if I can get to this page. There we go. At safetyconference.com, or our YouTube channel is up on the screen. And I can also make the presentation as a PDF. If you just want to post that into the chat feature, I'd be happy to email that to you afterward. A couple of questions for you. This is a specific question from a listener. We recently experienced an accident on an aerial lift, and it was the result of the tilt cylinder being defective. The basket suddenly tilted, throwing 2 employees out of the basket. The lift was a customer's lift, but even if it was ours, how do we account for a potential issue like this on the pre-inspection form? We would not have caught this defect.
It's entirely possible that no one would have caught the defect. It may well be, it could only be really an inspection issue. And the manufacturer, unfortunately, it's up to the manufacturer to determine what the inspection regimen for their key components are. I can tell you that there have been experiences many years ago. I can go back 20 years and talk about basket tilt mechanisms having problems. It's not something that would cause a rash of problems in the industry. It's still a very unusual thing, really. But I think the only way that you can guard against it is to follow the inspection regimen of the manufacturer. I'm sure that the manufacturer at some point must have information which would encourage the inspection of that, maybe on an annual basis and after damage, or it may be included in a frequent inspection every 3 months. But adherence to the manufacturer's inspection regimen is vital. And the other thing to say to you too is that if you feel that at any time that you have a machine from a manufacturer that you feel is not adequately covering the concerns that you have, the ANSI standard, or even the members of the ANSI committee or members of the subcommittees of SAI and IPATH would be more than happy, I'm sure, to give you further advice on what you might do to prevent something like that.
Okay, great. Second question would be improvised coverings like the drop cloths for paint or drywall. Are these allowed, and must they be engineered into the product?
The answer is they might be allowed, but the only person who can give you authorization to use it is the manufacturer of the equipment.
Okay.
Every time you hang a drop cloth or you put a shade on top of a basket of a boom lift or on top of the platform of a scissor lift, you're creating something that will provide wind resistance. and that's a problem in any kind of elevated equipment. And it's a bit like on mast climbing work platforms. We always get general contractors asking if they can put their sign on the back of the mast climber. The answer is no, unless the manufacturer says that it's okay. So does it have to be engineered? I guess that says yes. You have to get permission from the manufacturer, and the manufacturer will require a lot of details with regard to type of material, the weight of the material, the dimensions, how it's going to be fixed to the basket, etc., etc.
Okay. Disclaimers on rental forms. If they have a disclaimer, does this cover them in the event that the end user does not provide proper safety training?
Well, let's start from the point where we should start. OSHA says, as I said in the presentation, under the general duty clause, the employer is responsible for training his or her employees. So the rental company doesn't really have any responsibilities to train you. The rental company may have a responsibility to familiarize, to make sure you're familiarized. That's in the ANSI standard. And what that means is giving specific information on that particular machine to someone who has already been trained to use boom lifts, for instance. Rental contracts are like any other form of contract. You really should take time and read it. But when it comes to the responsibility for training, the responsibility, as per the question that's been asked, is definitely on the employer.
Great. Is there one place that all of the regulations, standards, best practices information can be downloaded? If not, maybe we should create one.
Well, let me qualify something. Well, obviously there is OSHA information, and if anyone needs specific links to pages on the OSHA website, they're welcome to, if they want to email you and then you pass them on to me, whatever way you want to do it, I'm happy to point them in the right direction. The ANSI standards are not available to download because you have to purchase an ANSI standard. And there are also ANSI codes of responsibility, a code of safe practice, if you like. It may be acceptable. You may think that that may be something that you want to purchase. Maybe one ANSI standard for office use. Your management team are more likely to use an ANSI standard to put together procedures. So let's take the ANSI standard aside. Everything else, the OSHA tip sheets, the OSHA regulations, etc., I can provide links to any of those back via email to anyone who requires them. When it comes to industry advice, best practice, similar. I know they're not all in the same place. That's because different organizations like to control their own documents, and they should. But is there a place to find everything? Apart from giving you the ANSI standard, the answer is yeah. I can point you in the direction. I can put together some links that will take you to where that information is.
Great. We've also been working on, internally, we've been working on a phone app for Lift and Access, and that is one of the things I've been trying to include is a page that includes the OSHA, ANSI standards, just links to them, but at least it's a start. But I'm not aware of a place that's available for download. So anyway, moving back to the questions. Oh, this comes up every time, but are you required to wear a safety harness in a scissor lift?
Well, here's the standard. Well, let me start from the standard apply. You have to wear a safety harness whenever there is a fall hazard. Okay. Secondly, at the moment, the advice is that one must, and OSHA's advice is that you must wear a full body harness with a restraining lanyard in a boom lift. It doesn't currently ask you to do the same thing on a scissor lift, but the other thing that you have to do on a scissor lift is refer to the manufacturer's guidelines. Some of the manufacturers do require you to wear a harness in a scissor lift. So it's mandatory for boom lifts, but for scissor lifts, one should check with the manufacturer.
Okay. And back to lanyards. If you wear a harness in a lift and you're not lifted 6 feet off the ground, but you fall out, you may hit the ground first. Do you recommend a different device versus lanyard, like a self-retracting lanyard?
Now, I think the best thing that I can do is, for whoever asked the question, is there is a very useful guide to assessing your fall protection requirements in the industry document that was produced by SAIA, IPAF, AEM, AED, and ARA. It's a very useful document. It doesn't cost any money, and I can certainly make sure that it's available on a link. I would be happy to do that for the person who asked the question. There are a number of things that you have to consider, so rather than take up the next 20 minutes on the subject, I will make sure that the whole document is sent to that individual, and if they need any help in clarifying it, I'll be happy to do it.
Sure. I think that was David that asked that question. So David, if you want to paste your email address in here, I'll shoot that over to Kevin. Okay. This is a product kind of question, but maybe it's worth looking at. Lanyard attachment warning systems. Are you aware of these systems that I guess if the lanyard is not attached, the machine doesn't move? Could not having this new technology be considered a violation of the general duty clause?
That's a big question. There are so many questions that fall within a question like that. In what way would it infringe on the general duty clause? The only way it could infringe on the general duty clause is if by using it you were providing or you weren't providing a safe working environment free from recognised hazards for your employees. So therefore I'm kind of not sure why it would violate the general duty clause terms. But I'm sure that there may well be more to the workings of the device, the way that it either attaches or warms, that may well throw up other questions. But there are devices like this all over the world. There are not many of them, but there are some, and they all work very differently. So it's very much an individual question. But for instance, if you're in a boom lift, you have to be attached at all times. If you're in a scissor lift, at the moment, according to the law, you don't have to be attached. So at the moment, I'm not quite sure what difference it would make under the auspices of a general duty clause.
Okay. Okay, that's perfectly fine. The quick question on ground conditions. Do you believe this is the main liability issue with aerial lifts?
No, I believe it's lack of training.
Okay.
Ground conditions is part of operator training. The assessment of where you're going to, where you started from, the ground that you have to traverse to be able to get to your working position. There are many aspects to ground conditions. The only way that ground conditions would be something that would cause an accident would be if someone hadn't fully considered them. And really that's where the training issue comes in. Lack of training is the root of most of the operator problems that we have at the moment.
Okay. Are you seeing more confusion between the ANSI A92 equipment and rough terrain forklifts with platforms? They're saying it's getting hard to tell the difference between the equipment with so many advances.
Well, it is getting hard to tell, but it was hard to tell 25 years ago. 25 years ago, when mobile mast climbers were really working on job sites, the reason that one had a mobile mast climber at the time and the reason it was hugely productive was it used to work between 40 and 60 feet on some of these type Walmart type buildings, where scissor lifts hadn't really gotten to that height yet. So what happened was scissor lifts then started to eat some of the market that the mast climbing work platforms had. Mast climbing work platforms then changed their design and became a very different masonry tool. Every time that this happens, products change and they find their own niche. I think yeah, sure, it's getting more difficult to discriminate between every type of piece of equipment. I think the ANSI standards at the moment have done quite a good job of discriminating between the types of equipment that is available. So I think if you actually go to the ANSI standards and you look at the descriptions of the types of product that the different ANSI standards cover, there are important differences between certain types of boom lift and other types of boom lift, for instance. For instance, a 60-foot JLG boom or a single personnel lift that will only vertically lift within the base frame dimensions that it's built with are two very different products. People might call them lifts or boom lifts, but they are two very different products. They have two very different environments that they work in, and they have two very different sets of regulations. So, I think the ANSI standards at the moment are covering the products well. The ANSI standard groups, who are going to be meeting in October in Las Vegas for their annual meetings, do continue the process, though, of examining all the new products to see if there is further dissemination required between different types of boom lift products, scissor lift, etc.
Okay, we have a few more questions. You had mentioned qualified and competent persons both in your presentation. Is there a difference between those two?
Yes. Qualified is someone who, by reason of degree or experience or knowledge, can prove under OSHA's definition that they have, or that they are qualified to do the job that they have been asked to do. A competent person is given the authority by his or her employer when they recognize an unsafe action on a job site. They have been given by their employer the authority to stop the job and take corrective action. So the difference, for instance, a qualified person may be an engineer within the office who designs the mast climber installation based on his or her knowledge. A competent person may well be the foreman or the forewoman on the job site who sees somebody doing something that's unsafe and has the authority to say stop, take the corrective action, and then allow the use to go ahead.
Okay. Two final questions here. I know someone had asked about inspections. We did a presentation in July on inspections, which you can access on our YouTube channel, but is the person that does the actual inspection for an annual inspection, is that person a qualified person?
Yeah, that person would have to be a qualified person.
Okay. Okay, we just discussed the requirements of a qualified person, so we can review that over the presentation again. Is there a recommendation for bucket truck training nationwide? I know we talk a lot about self-propelled machines, but what about bucket truck?
Kind of not in the same fashion. There is bucket truck training, obviously. There's manufacturer training. But do most of the training organisations offer bucket truck training in the same way that they offer boom, scissors, and mast climber training? At the moment, no. But I think the first port of call for bucket truck training has to be with the manufacturer of the equipment.
Okay. And is there a particular height at which the outriggers must be put out on a scissor lift?
Different about manufacturers again. Yep. There's a bit of confusion on this only because, and I mentioned in the presentation that OSHA regulations are very, very old and were produced before booms and scissors and mast climbers really came into use. And OSHA has a regulation about the base dimension of a machine and the machine not being able to raise 4 times the height of the base dimension, which is to do with a stability calculation. That doesn't really affect the use of booms and scissors. Some people think it does at the moment. Really what OSHA points to and what the industry points to is the design by the manufacturer. Scissor lifts have different stability calculations based on, for instance, whether if they have rollout decks or power decks that extend outside the base dimension of the scissor lift itself would be a different stability calculation than from one that just moves straight up and down within the base dimensions of the machine. Some of these scissor lifts are self-leveling. Some of them are designed to level to a rather high degree of slope. Other ones are just stabilizers. We have to be, again, very careful on each of these products, what we have and how it should be used. So there's no magic number above which one must use stabilizers or outriggers or a scissor lift. It's vital that the person who is using the machine is absolutely au fait with the manufacturer's information on use of this product.
Okay, one final question. The cards that rental companies provide after familiarization, does this count as training?
No. You mean
no.
Do you mean the card with the information on it, on the controls? Is that the question?
They just say card, so you know, there's a difference between a training card and familiarization, I believe. But
so familiarization is something that would normally be given to someone who's already had training from the employer. Familiarization is designed to make you aware of the specific controls on that particular machine. So really what the industry is asking is that one should have had general training on the awareness of hazards and the use in general of booms and scissors, and then when a particular machine is delivered to your job site, the specifics of it are what form familiarization. So no, it's not training. It's a bit like when you get your first car. You pass your driver's test, that's training, and 2 years later when you sell your Ford and you buy a Volvo, you take 20 minutes to figure out where all the controls are in your new car, that's familiarization. So you've already been trained, but you have to make sure you know where the brake and the accelerator is in the Volvo, and is it in the same place as it was in the Ford.
Or your rental car. All right. Yeah. I believe that's the last question that we have for today. If there are no other questions, thank you, Kevin, again for your time and expertise. And thank you, everyone, for attending. This is the August edition of the 2012 Safety Conference webinar series. If you have any comments, suggestions, questions, post-event, please feel free to email me at kparish@maxcapmedia.com, or you can give me a call at the phone number on the screen. Again, thank you all for coming. Have a great afternoon.